The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is the United Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the very first podcast of The Young American. I am your host, Joseph Bemister. We are here live from the Studio 21 Podcast Café. Find us on iHeartRadio, Podbeam, United Podcast Network, and YouTube Live. This podcast is fully fact-based about politics, also opinionated about our government officials, government, the new laws, and how the government is changing in direction for good and bad to the eyes of a young American libertarian. Today, we'll be talking about the hypocrisy at the Oscars, the student walkout on March 17th, actually 14th, Trump's gun control, and our stance on the Second Amendment and how we interpret it. We're going to start off with the hypocrisy at the Oscars. There was a lot of speech about gun control there and how they want to ban firearms altogether. At the Oscars, there was over 500 officers on hand, the bomb squad, and LAPD SWAT team protecting them. But they've yet to call for a full ban of firearms. And I kind of find that funny, a little humorous that they decided to call and take the side of anti-gun, but then yet have so many people protecting them with firearms and so many unnecessary resources to protect them instead of us. A lot of people don't understand that firearms are around us on a daily basis. In New Hampshire, where we are right now, I believe was like an 83% rate people.
It is certainly up there.
It's huge. And we have something called constitutional carry, where anybody over the age of 18 who is legally able to own a firearm can legally carry, concealed, openly. The only regulation, I believe, is you can't carry a loaded rifle in your truck. And that's a conservation law. So if you wanted to go hunting, you can't just go out of your way and have a loaded firearm or rifle in your truck. You're allowed to have a pistol, and that's about it. The student walkout on March 14th. It's going to be for 17 minutes. It's organized by Students Demand Action Against Gun Violence in light of the Parkland shooting. They're calling for gun control instead of more safety. And being a student myself in high school, I kind of look at it in a different perspective as why ban guns as a whole, because if you ban guns, all the unregistered firearms, everybody who has them illegally you can't get those from them. You're not going to know they have them unless they get caught with them. So why take them away from people who could protect themselves potentially instead of use them in a bad way, which 99% of people who own firearms legally don't end up using them in a bad way. Can they get into hands of criminals and people who are going to use them in a negative way? Absolutely. It happens every single day. But more than not, they're stolen from police officers. They're stolen out of homes, retailers. They're bought off the street. And there's no point in banning these firearms and taking them away from people who...
Well, and really, I think what you're saying there is the only thing that's going to come out of this is that the good people are going to be giving up their guns. In order to get the guns out of the bad people's hands, we're going to have to go and have people give up an awful lot of civil liberties because, let's face it, we know who the bad guys are.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to go into their homes without a search warrant just because we know they're bad guys and take the guns away. So if you're willing to give up some of your civil liberties in that respect, if you're willing to take it to that level, I guess I could be on board myself, but I don't think very many people are willing to allow the government just to come in and have searches and seizures without proper documentation and without getting the courts involved.
Exactly, and that's where it comes to due process. I believe it was 2-3 days ago, Trump said that he wants to, if it comes down to a confiscation or a violent crime, someone commits a violent crime, he wants to take away the firearms and go to due process later, which is a complete violation of our rights. And being libertarian, I don't look at it as a Democrat or Republican perspective. I looked at it as a freedom perspective. It's our rights. It was... I believe it's in the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments in the Constitution. It's almost impossible to do that.
Have you always been a libertarian, Joseph?
I have not. At first, I was a more conservative Tea Partyist, and then I kind of looked at it as a way as you can't just have one point of view because you're blinded by one side. If you don't look at both sides, you don't understand where they're coming from. And as I looked at both sides, I've kind of discovered that both sides they're uncooperative. But that's
very astute observation for a 17-year-old.
Yeah. That kind of comes down to also will, like your own free will. You can't govern people's free will.
Amen.
You shouldn't have to. You shouldn't want to. Let them do what they want. If they're not directly hurting somebody else or even indirectly hurting somebody else, why is it a law, or why is there laws regulating free will?
And would you say as a libertarian that you find yourself researching both sides of the argument and coming up with your own opinion, or do you tend to go down the party lines when it comes to how most libertarians believe?
Both, a little bit of both. I look at what libertarians have to say. Obviously, there's groups on Facebook. One's, I think, called Being Libertarian. The other one is the Liberty Hangout. And you can go and look at what a libertarian is if you're interested in finding out what the libertarian political stance is. Essentially, it's freedom. It's you do what you want to do if you're not hurting anybody else. Essentially, it's just the Constitution. You're a constitutionalist and a constitutionalist only. That comes first over everything, obviously. But sadly, that's not the way our government's going. And I kind of see the United States as a whole being divided, and they're getting pretty violent towards each other just because they don't agree. And I don't think that is a good way to express your feelings. Especially, we're not the enemy. We're not fighting each other. We're not wanting or wishing harm against one another. And sadly, that's how our main political parties in the United States feel against each other as everyday people. And that's, to me, very surprising, how we came out of some of the worst times ever. We are able to essentially save the world in the world wars against Nazi Germany, against fascism, against communism and totalitarian control. And now it kind of seems that one side, actually both sides now are kind of calling for totalitarian control, except for their beliefs. They want only what they want, and they don't ever want to compromise, and that's never going to get us anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you need to be able to, at the very least, be able to hear someone else's argument without getting mad at them. Your belief being different than mine doesn't mean that I have to dislike you.
Exactly.
We can still be friends, and we can have opposing viewpoints.
Yeah,
I'm with you there, Joe.
We actually had a conversation in my practical law class today that our teacher expressed we're going to have a debate and a paper based on firearms and how we feel about them and our rights and the Second Amendment. And she said a lot of you will not feel strong against it. A lot of you may or might, but you shouldn't get violent towards the other person. You shouldn't dislike the other person. You should respect their views and tell them, I don't believe your views, but they're your views, and I've known you. You're in my class. I'm going to be respectful to you because that's how everybody should be.
That's a good teacher right there. That's a good teacher.
Yes. I think now what's going on in with the new administration, I'm actually kind of going along about this now. The new administration, everybody was caught by surprise that President Trump decided to call for a new gun control bill regulation. It was to change the age to own any firearm at all to 21. But I looked at hypocrisy in this, without upping the age for joining the military or anything to do with that responsibility of owning
So anyone
firearm.
from the age of 18 to 20 would be in violation of the law if they are joining the military and the military gives them a gun.
Essentially, yes, but in many states where the military is stationed, you're not allowed to have fully automatic weapons, assault rifles, so they kind of fall into it's a gray area. But again, the military doesn't care. They don't care if you're 18 or not. If the rule says you can join the military at 18 but you can't own a firearm at 21, they're going to have you go in the military and they're going to give you a gun, and there's going to be absolutely no consequences for them because they are the government and they can do what they want.
Sure.
So if they were to up the age of joining government to 21, go right ahead. But when you decide not to let a individual own a firearm when they're 21 until they're 21 years old, but tell them they are responsible enough to go in the military and fight for our country at 18. I don't think that is
And even more important than that, wouldn't you think that the responsibility of voting for the next president of the United States and voting for senators and congresspeople, that responsibility, if you can't own and be responsible with a firearm, can you be trusted with that great responsibility of electing the officials that are going to govern the government?
Oh, yeah, especially when it comes to down to the reasoning. It was because of they didn't think anybody under the age of 21 is mentally stable enough to have this responsibility of owning a firearm. So when it comes down to what their reasoning was, it makes absolutely no sense. Although he has backed off, but his initial proposal was two-sided. I will give him that. He did listen to both sides, which is a good thing. But at the same time, he didn't look at it as we're giving this reasoning of mental health. It's because anybody under the age of 21 isn't stable enough, and yet we're still going to let them do X, Y, and Z, which, as we've already said, join the military, vote, other extreme responsibilities.
Drive a car.
Drive a car, yeah.
Just as dangerous as a handgun.
It's even more dangerous. A lot more people die from cars than almost anything else in the United States. Car accidents, drunk drivers, faulty vehicles. It happens all the time. And it's
100% true.
It's reality. I think it did catch everybody by surprise when he proposed new gun regulations and legislation, because he was so pro Second Amendment, pro my rights. It was
it looked like early on that he was in the pocket of the NRA.
Exactly.
And then for him to come out and say they don't scare him was a little disheartening.
Yeah, and I think he kind of regretted that, because as soon as he had the meeting with the NRA right after that, he backed off on almost anything. And that comes down to what the NRA is and who they're about. I haven't truly decided if I don't really have an opinion on them right now. I had an opinion until I started to do more research. They wanted to ban bump stocks. They wanted the age to go up. And I think they listened to their members. Most of their members are in the early 20s. A lot of them are starting to join now who are around my age, 17, 18 years old, people who are in the military who aren't 21 yet, and they listened to what they had to say, and I believe they backed off. But at the same time, you have to look what their intent was. Their intent was to take away objects in firearms accessories that would essentially make a firearms rate of fire faster, and they decided that was something they want to ban when it's not even an actual firearm. You can actually make the bump stock, which they wanted to ban, out of a 2x4 and 2 screws. It's
really,
yeah. All it is essentially you can actually bump stock without the stock. You actually bump fire. It's called. What it is, it's the recoil of the firearm up against your finger, and when it comes back, obviously when it recoils, your finger's not touching it, and when it goes forward and you push it forwards, all it is your finger is touching the trigger and allowing it to go off.
And that's how it allows you to have a higher rate of fire.
Yep, it runs out. It's a recoil device.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
That they also said in the legislation any rate increasing device. So that could be Geisley makes a trigger called the Geisley Super 3-gun trigger. It would be that. Anything. It was open for interpretation, and they could interpret it as, okay, the bump stocks, binary triggers, elastic bands you can actually use to simulate full automatic fire. Almost anything you can. A lot of people don't understand that.
How the hell can you use a rubber? You know what? I don't want to educate anybody on this, so we'll talk after the show. We'll talk after the show about that one.
Yeah. A lot of people think now he praised Reagan. He said he wanted to be like Reagan, Make America Great Again, I believe was Reagan's slogan. And he's becoming like Reagan with the gun control. He's modeling exactly after Reagan. Not to say he wasn't a good president, which a lot of people on the right side were calling him a good president until they started doing the research, and they absolutely jumped down his throat and said that Reagan wasn't a good president just because he called for gun control. Now, I don't have a stance. I wasn't alive, obviously, when Reagan was president. I look at it as he was good for the economy. He was good for the American people. Gun rights is something, I hate to say it, it's something small in the United States, but it's also something so big. Without the Second Amendment to protect us from tyranny, or a government deciding to abuse their power, there's nothing from guaranteeing us any other amendment. The Bill of Rights was put there for a reason. The Second Amendment was added in there to protect the Bill of Rights by the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. They came to a conclusion when they were writing the Constitution after Articles of Confederation were kind of pushed out. And that's why we have what we have now.
Now, you hear arguments on the left that say if your goal is to use the Second Amendment to defend yourself against your own government, what about the fact that the U.S. government has, say, nuclear submarines, and one submarine can wipe out the entire United States?
Yeah.
So is the Second Amendment still a viable thing if the government at this point has weapons that are so massive and so powerful they can wipe out their own people?
Oh, absolutely not. We wrote the Second Amendment, our founding fathers, what they described it as the ability for the American people to defend themselves against their own government in case of tyranny. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
I think it's tyranny.
I think so. And basically what that means is, okay, the government have, back then it was muskets, it was Gatling guns, it was actually they had, I don't know if this was in our arsenal, but I saw a picture. It was something along the lines of a automatic grenade launcher from the 1600s. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but all I saw was it was like something modeled after the Gatling gun. But
if
it was
you see it on the internet,
device.
Joseph, it's got to
probably
be
not
true. It's got to be true.
It's there, but I'd have to do more research on that for next time.
Okay.
But the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. We are absolutely infringing on our rights, allowing the states to. But that was also written into our government too. The Supreme Court ruled that the states can regulate the Second Amendment, but cannot completely abolish it, obviously. And it was written there for a reason, for the American people to have the exact same materials, the exact same hardware, weaponry that the government has, so they can protect themselves against their own government in case of tyranny again. And that's a big part of how the United States was, that's actually how the United States was formed. We fought against tyranny. We decided that we wanted to not be a part of a tyrannical empire when we were colonized, and this is where we are today. And it's sad to see us kind of going back in that way, where there's the federalists, anti-federalists, as I would put it, and they are believing more in the government and total control than the rights of the people. And it's a sad thing, but that's how we're going, and that's the reality.
All right, moving right along.
I think that was our last talking point right now.
All right. So do you have any thoughts of what you're going to cover in your next podcast?
Yes, I do, actually. Let's see what this is. This sums up this episode of The Young American. This is the first ever episode. I'm kind of excited to see how I did when I watched this back over.
Did great.
Thank you. We're live from the Studio 21 Podcast Café. I'm your host, Joseph Bemister, again. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you guys next week. And we'll talk about why I feel the Republicans are okay with Trump's gun control bill, and why the NRA is supporting him, or was supporting him, and what the NRA kind of is, who they are, how they've become what they've become. And also how the new legislation would lead to something much more, a gun buyback program, an attempted confiscation, and maybe even violence between the government and the gun owners.
It's going to be an action-packed show next week.
It's going to be awesome in 10 minutes.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.